Good evening, I'm Brett Baer. Senate Democrats are apparently drawing their own line in the sand over Iran. More than a dozen of them are joining Republicans on a measure that would force the president to raise sanctions on the Islamic Republic if it violates a new nuclear deal with the West. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry reports on what this tells us about how President Obama is perceived.
In defiance of President Obama, 26 senators, including 13 prominent Democrats like Bob Menendez and Chuck Schumer, have signed on to legislation that would impose tough new sanctions against Iran if the regime pulls back from high-stakes negotiations with the U.S. and fails to terminate its nuclear weapons program.
What it means is there's widespread bipartisan dissatisfaction with where we are in the Iran negotiations, because what the administration really did was push the pause button on existing sanctions, thereby giving the Iranians a lot of relief in return for nothing other than them talking to us.
While it's unclear whether Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid will even bring up the legislation, the rare bipartisan move startled the president's aides, prompting spokesman Jay Carney to issue this rare threat against a bill being pushed by senior Democrats.
We don't think it will be enacted. If it were enacted, the president would veto it. And the risk of passing new sanctions now is that doing so would derail the negotiations just when diplomacy is making progress.
The problem for the president is that leading Democrats like Menendez, chairman of the powerful Senate Foreign Relations Committee, disagree. Menendez declaring, quote, current sanctions brought Iran to the negotiating table, and a credible threat of future sanctions will require Iran to cooperate and act in good faith at the negotiating table. In another sign of the intra-party dust-up, the liberal group MoveOn.org blasted senators by name today, declaring, quote, Democrats like Senators Schumer and Menendez should stop supporting Republican efforts to undermine President Obama's diplomacy. The last thing our country needs right now is another war. Fox has learned that White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough and several other top officials were burning up the phone lines, making the same case to senators who moved forward with that legislation anyway.
Well, what does that say about the president's standing with his own party right now, that they're defying him?
I think that there is overwhelming support in the country and in the Congress for a diplomatic resolution to this conflict.
Carney added U.S. military action is now more likely because the push on Capitol Hill may blow up the talks with Iran. The Republican John McCain fired back that a series of actions, like Iranian officials plotting to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the U.S. while he was dining at a Washington restaurant a few years ago, should make the White House more skeptical of talks.
But by golly, we trust them to sit down and negotiate with us seriously on the issue of nuclear weapons. This is the most narrow view of Iran than has ever happened in history.
Now, in reaction to Jay Carney saying that this could derail the whole diplomatic process, Republican Mark Kirk, the co-sponsor of this sanctions bill, fired back, and I'm quoting him here, I think appeasement actually leads to war. Look at Neville Chamberlain in World War II. That is pretty tough talk and suggests just how delicate this whole situation is, Brett.
Ed Henry live on the North Lawn.